shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
In August 1963, as Southerners in Congress delayed action on the new bill, civil rights groups organized a massive march on Washington. More than 200,000 people filled the mall, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument.
And through your suffering and your willingness to accept blows without retaliating, you at that moment find yourself working on the conscience of the opponent. You are exposing his moral defenses. You are weakening his morale.
For all South Africans, an unforgettable occasion.
Mr. Mandela has walked a long road and now stands at the top of the hill.
I was sitting in the lobby minding my own business with my girlfriend, and suddenly 5 police ran in to get them the hell out of here, and they started clubbing me over the head.
Our police department is the greatest police department in the United States, and the men in there are all family men and decent men, and they don't respond with any undue violence.
On August 3, 1997, 185,000 members of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters walked off the job at the world's largest package delivery company, U.S.-based United Parcel Service. 15 days later, the company settled with the labor union, agreeing to convert many part-time jobs to full-time, to increase wages and benefits, and to lengthen their union contract. In 1998, at the invitation of Cuban leader Fidel Castro, Pope John Paul II made a historic 5-day visit to communist Cuba. The 77-year-old Pope visited 4 cities and celebrated Mass before 750,000 people in Havana. The audience included communist officials, foreign visitors, and anti-Castro exiles who returned to Cuba just for the Pope's visit. In 1970, socialist politician Salvador Allende won election as president of Chile. Allende redistributed land to peasants and nationalized many large corporations. These policies sharply divided the nation. Social unrest followed. In 1973, a military coup left Allende dead and led to almost 2 decades of direct military rule.
In August 1991, communist hardliners staged a coup attempt after Mikhail Gorbachev proposed greater independence for the republics of the Soviet Union. Boris Yeltsin led a popular resistance to put down the coup, and the Communist Party was suspended. In December, Yeltsin and other republic leaders created the Commonwealth of Independent States. Gorbachev then resigned, and the Soviet Union was officially dissolved.
Benito Mussolini, the founder of Italian fascism, seized power in 1922. Known as Il Duce, the leader, Mussolini assumed control over all aspects of Italian life. Backed by a black-shirted militia, the charismatic Mussolini quickly won support for his nationalistic policies. Repeated Italian defeats during World War II, however, led to domestic unrest, and in 1943, Mussolini was ousted from power.
On March 6, 1957, Kwame Nkrumah led the British West African colony of the Gold Coast to independence as the nation of Ghana. The jubilant independence ceremonies and Nkrumah's inauguration as Prime Minister were attended by political figures from around the world. Ghana was the first black African nation to gain independence. Its achievement inspired independence movements across Africa in the years that followed.
Throughout the history of the United States, women have fought for equality. Feminists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848, where they made the first public demand for voting rights for women. After years of organized rallies and civil disobedience, women in the United States finally won the right to vote in 1919 with the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In early 1917, Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin began calling for the overthrow of the provisional government that had replaced the Russian monarchy earlier that year. On October 24th and 25th, armed workers and sympathetic soldiers and sailors stormed the Winter Palace, the government's headquarters in Petrograd, and deposed the provisional government.
The almost bloodless insurrection, known as the October Revolution, brought the Bolsheviks to the forefront of the new socialist government.
In 1992, the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina declared its independence from Yugoslavia. Civil war erupted between Bosnian Serbs, who wanted to remain part of Yugoslavia, and the Republic's Croats and Muslims. Serb separatists mounted an armed siege of Sarajevo, Bosnia's capital and largest city. By the time the war ended in late 1995, more than 10,000 Sarajevo residents had been killed and thousands more had been wounded.
Political and religious strife between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland has resulted in frequent riots in its capital city of Belfast. In the early 1970s, civil unrest caused the British government to send troops to the region to maintain order. Frequently, though, the troops themselves became the target of the riots.
In 1995, Canadian politician Lucien Bouchard led a movement that advocated the secession of the province of Quebec from Canada. Bouchard and other French-Canadian nationalists wanted to establish Quebec as an independent republic, with French as its official language. The secession movement was opposed by Canada's federal government, led by Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. In October 1995, Quebec's voters rejected sovereignty by a margin of less than 1%.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed.
In October 1934, about 80,000 Chinese communists began a forced retreat northward after Kuomintang forces surrounded their base in southern China. Their retreat, known as the Long March, took the communists over 6,000 miles of rough terrain before they reached Shanxi province a year later. Only 8,000 of the original marchers survived. However, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, the communists turned this military defeat into a moral victory and eventually defeated the Kuomintang for control of China.
In the mid-1980s, South Africa entered an increasingly bloody chapter in the struggle to end apartheid, the country's rigid policy of racial segregation. In 1985, in the black township of Soweto, police arrested hundreds of students, some as young as 7 years old, who were participating in a school boycott. Faced with an escalating crisis, the South African government declared a nationwide state of emergency. Thousands of blacks were detained and thousands more killed before apartheid was dismantled in the early 1990s.
On May 21, 1990, members of the activist group ACT UP, or AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, demonstrated in front of the National Institutes of Health headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland. They demanded that government officials and research scientists develop better treatments for people with AIDS and a greater representation of women and minorities in clinical trials. Since it was formed in the mid-1980s, ACT UP has used provocative demonstrations to criticize government funding and research efforts, as well as to increase public awareness about AIDS.
On July 1, 1997, Hong Kong, a British colony for 155 years, was returned to Chinese sovereignty. Participating in the handover ceremony were Chris Patten, Hong Kong's last British governor, Britain's Prince Charles, Chinese President Jiang Zemin, and the new chief executive of Hong Kong, Tong Chee-hwa. Fireworks and celebrations marked the historic event. From his rebel base in the Sierra Maestra Mountains of Cuba, Fidel Castro waged a guerrilla war against the government of dictator Fulgencio Batista. By 1959, Castro's forces were in control of Havana, the capital. Once in power, Castro transformed Cuba into a Soviet-style island state. He built an open friendship with the Soviet Union that placed Cuba in the center of the Cold War.
Like many revolutionary leaders, Castro's power is based on both personal charisma and a tightly controlled political system that maintains his position. The much revered Mohandas Gandhi was the spiritual and political leader of the Indian independence movement. When he spoke, millions listened. Teaching nonviolence, Gandhi used symbolic gestures like spinning cloth to advocate a return to village industries and marching to the sea as a demonstration against a British salt tax. Jailed frequently, Gandhi was prepared to fast unto death to protest caste-based injustices and religious violence between Hindus and Muslims. Assassinated in 1948, his funeral caused international mourning.
In late 1989, citizens of Czechoslovakia staged pro-democracy demonstrations against the communist-led government. Despite initial police resistance, rallies in the capital city of Prague attracted more than 200,000 people by November. Unable to curb the demands for political change, the communist government collapsed in December. Alexander Dubček, who had led a movement for reform in 1968, was elected chairman of the Federal Assembly, while playwright and opposition leader Václav Havel was chosen as the country's new president. Because of its bloodless nature, the transition to non-communist rule in Czechoslovakia became known as the Velvet Revolution.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people?
I solemnly promise so to do.
The Lord clothe you with the robe of righteousness and with the garments of receive the royal scepter, the ensign of kingly power.
In 1991, United States Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas was accused of sexual harassment by law professor Anita Hill during nationally televised confirmation hearings.
After a brief discussion of work, he would turn the conversation to a discussion of sexual matters. His conversations were very vivid.
Thomas denied the allegations.
I am a victim of this process. My name has been harmed. My integrity has been harmed. My character has been harmed. My family has been harmed.
Thomas was later confirmed by the Senate. The hearings raised national awareness of sexual harassment in the workplace. In 1959, United States Vice President Richard Nixon led Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev through a model kitchen at a United States exhibition in Moscow. Television cameras captured their impromptu political debate over the values of capitalism and communism.
And I will promise you that every word that you have said here will be reported in the United States, and they will see you say it on television.
Но я видел, я сомневаюсь, поэтому я хочу, чтобы вы, вице-президент, что вы даете слово, что моя речь тоже будет записана на английском языке. Будет, нет?
Certainly it will. Certainly. Yes. Right.
In 1949, Germany was divided by the victors of World War II into occupied zones. The western regions united to form a federal republic, and the Soviet-controlled zone became Communist East Germany. The Cold War had begun. Berlin, the former capital of Germany, was divided into East Berlin and West Berlin, but was located deep in the Soviet-controlled zone. In 1961, the East German government erected a wall separating the two halves of the city. The Western world helped prevent the complete isolation of West Berlin through an effort led by the United States. President John F. Kennedy declared his commitment.
As a free man, I take pride in the word, Ich bin ein Berliner.
At the brink of nuclear war, the United States and Soviet Union reached a stalemate, but the Berlin Wall remained a symbol of the Cold War battle line known as the Iron Curtain. It was not until the 1980s that the Cold War tensions eased through the glasnost policies of Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Finally, in November 1989, immigration barriers dropped, allowing free passage between the two halves of the city. Soon the wall crumbled at the hands of the people it once divided.
In 1945, the victors of World War II, Western democracies and the Soviet Union, divided Europe between them. struggles against communist rebels in Greece and the siege of the Western enclave in Berlin signalled a new European conflict, the Cold War. The Maoist victory in China and the outbreak of the Korean War took the struggle beyond Europe, while McCarthyism in the United States demonstrated that it was affecting public opinion even in the world's great democracies.
Are you a member of the Communist Party, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
In 1961, the Berlin Wall went up, dividing Berlin, while in 1962, a US-Soviet standoff over missiles in Cuba brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. In Vietnam, a war between communists and Western-backed forces was to demonstrate the limits to US military might. Meanwhile, in 1968, Czechoslovakia rose against rigid communism, only to be crushed. In 1975, the Vietnam War ended in defeat for anti-communist forces. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan brought a new harder line in US-Soviet relations, and Mikhail Gorbachev tried to reform communism with his glasnost policies.
We want friendship between our two peoples.
But once reform had begun, pressure for change proved unstoppable, and the Iron Curtain crumbled before the people it had once divided. The Cold War was over.
On December 19, 1998, Bill Clinton became the second United States president in history to be impeached when the House of Representatives passed 2 articles of impeachment, accusing him of perjury and obstruction of justice. The previous January, independent counsel Kenneth Starr began investigating allegations that Clinton lied while testifying in a civil suit against him. In his testimony, Clinton denied having sexual relations with a White House intern named Monica Lewinsky. In August, Clinton appeared before a grand jury investigating the matter after evidence indicated that the two did have an affair.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
In September, Starr delivered his report to Congress, alleging that the president had committed a variety of potentially impeachable offenses. Following the release of that report, members of the House of Representatives argued heatedly over whether to impeach the president.
What does lying under oath do to the rule of law? Do we still have a government of laws and not of men? Does the law apply to some people with force and ferocity while the powerful are immune?
The president had an affair. He lied about it. He didn't want anyone to know about it. Does anyone reasonably believe that this amounts to subversion of government? Does anyone reasonably believe that this is what the Founding Fathers were talking about?
After considerable debate, the House approved 2 articles of impeachment, making Clinton only the second U.S. president ever impeached and the first since Andrew Johnson in 1868.
The yeas are 221, the nays are 212. Article 3 is adopted.
In January 1999, members of the Senate were sworn in as jurors in a trial to determine whether or not Clinton was guilty of the charges against him and should be removed from office. As specified in the Constitution, Chief Justice of the United States William Rehnquist presided over the trial. On February 12, 1999, the Senate found Clinton not guilty of either of the articles of impeachment.
And 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charges contained therein. It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said William Jefferson Clinton be and he hereby is acquitted of the charges in the said articles.